Hey, everybody. Welcome to Treasury Orange. Today, I'm in conversation with Daniel McAdams. Daniel is Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He's Dr. Paul's co-host on the Ron Paul Liberty Report and was a senior advisor and staffer to Ron Paul when he served in the U.S. House. Mr. McAdams, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, Daniel, you've been kind of at the center of the liberty movement, I'd say, with Ron Paul for years. Looking back, how do you think Ron Paul's 2008 and 2012 presidential runs created, the political space for small government crusaders to kind of operate within the GOP?
I think it obviously did a great deal. It brought things to the forefront that had never been part of the conversation before. The idea that the Federal Reserve was the core problem of all of our problems was kind of considered fringe theory before that. In fact, I guess it was last year, we went down to visit with Tucker Carlson, and he said, I started liking you early in those campaigns, but I just sort of dismissed this idea that the Fed is a problem. I thought it was just sort of a kooky thing. And then I looked into it and I realized how essential and important it is. And so I think that is the key. And that is also Dr. Paul's identification of the Fed as the root cause of our problems is also something that brings together libertarians, of course, but also conservatives and even progressives understand the destructive power of the Fed. Anti-war people understand the destructive power of the Fed. Super ultra free market people understand the destructive power of the Fed. So I think that was just one of many critical things that he opened the door for people to start considering.
Sure. So in 2008, Ron Paul famously schooled Rudy Giuliani, in the debate, the Republican debate, on the folly of, I'd say, foreign interventionism and the consequences of blowback with regard to 9/11. Can you walk us down memory lane and tell us why was it pivotal that Ron Paul kind of gave permission, I'd say, to a lot of conservatives who could now be critical of, maybe the neoconservative foreign policy that was dominant in the Republican Party at the time and still has some vestiges today?
Well, that's true, and in fact, just to step back a little bit further than that, I sort of came of age philosophically, I suppose, in the late 80s, early 90s. And as I spent the 90s living overseas in Europe, and as I realized, and I was involved in the Republican Party and all this sort of stuff, but I came to realize the futility and in fact, the destructiveness of the neocon foreign policy. But I still consider myself conservative on many issues. And so for me, it was discovering Ron Paul in 1998 when I was living in Hungary and watching as NATO was about to invade Serbia. And I realized that here's an anti-war voice that's not coming from the left. And it freed me up, intellectually to say, well, hold on. Like, yeah, I'm anti-war, but I'm not a left. I don't hate leftish people, but I'm not leftish. And so that opened the door. And that's the same way that Dr. Paul himself did back in the debates of '07. When he opened the door for hundreds of, at least millions of people by saying it doesn't have to be this way. You can challenge this dominant, which is actually a relatively recent stranglehold on Republican foreign policy. Let's not forget, it wasn't before. I mean, it was only the 1980s when President Reagan, to his eternal discredit, opened up a big chunk of foreign policy to the neocons when he created the National Endowment for Democracy and allowed a lot of former leftist Trotskyites from New York to take control of his democratization efforts. That's where they really took their, gripped into foreign policy. So it's relatively recent, but a thorough stranglehold on foreign policy from that point on. And when Ron Paul had the courage to say this, and for him, trust me, it wasn't him backstage working up the courage. Yeah, I'm going to hit Rudy. I'm going to really take him out. It was just a spontaneous response because we all worked for Ron Paul in the congressional office, which is very different from the campaign office. We were writing position papers. We were managing his floor schedule and all these sorts of things. We weren't involved in the excitement of the campaign, so we knew how he operated. So when he just spontaneously blurted this out, matter of factly, of course, for us, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is going to kill him. This is it. I was really worried. And so were my colleagues in the office. But to our surprise, the nation was ready for what he had to say. And yes, it didn't get him into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but I've argued in even a speech as recently as this summer that it changed the world. Just that one moment and the subsequent moments, but that's a big one, changed the world in many, many ways.
That's a really cool anecdote, Daniel. Um, yeah, I mean, Dr. Paul comes across as like one of the most genuine politicians, I think, out there. He's influenced several other politicians. Thomas Massey comes to mind as someone else too, and he really has a genuine quality to him. Being behind the scenes and working for Dr. Paul. How genuine is he? How different of a person is he in the limelight, or is what you see what you get?
Yeah, it's that's very much how he is, and in fact, I mean, it's interesting. My relationship with him has changed since I worked with him on the Hill. He was very kind on the Hill, and in fact, one of the few times that he was annoyed with me um, was really kind of interesting. My wife was having our third child, and she was in pretty serious distress. She had been hospitalized. I won't go into the details, but it was a pretty big problem, and I did not want to bother. This is Ron Paul. I'm not going to bother him with my petty family problems, and so I didn't say anything. And he found out through the grapevine, through my colleagues, that this was going on, and it was a pretty serious issue. And he called me and was, I wouldn't say so much annoyed, but hurt that I didn't. Why wouldn't you consult me? I've been through this. I've delivered thousands of babies, and I felt really bad, but I was ashamed to bring my personal problems to him. And it turns out I explained the quandary that we were in, and he gave me advice, and it was the absolute correct advice. Thank God my wife was able to come back and even have another baby. So it was good advice. Um, but that's how he was in the office on Capitol Hill. It was a lot more formal. Whenever he was going to be in town, we always had to have our coat and tie on. And that wasn't because he demanded it. It was because the decorum of the house, believe it or not, back then, there was something called decorum. People weren't throwing out F-bombs like they do nowadays. The decorum of the house required you to look presentable when the members of Congress were around. Now, people, especially, anarcho types, and I put myself in that category, would say, well, that's ridiculous. But again, I mean, we should have a world where there is some formality. So nevertheless, it was more formal then. But I've been with him with the Ron Paul Institute for the last 12 years, I guess, or more than 12 years. And it's more different. It's personal. We've traveled together. We've been through scrapes together. But the one thing that comes through all of it is his great sense of humor. And it's even more evident when you're behind the scenes. Every day in the studio, he'll crack some kind of joke, some kind of a funny little joke, very kind of deadpan kind of joke. "Oh, I guess I got to come back tomorrow," something like that. But it's always very funny, and it's just very sweet. So that's been a real bonus for me working for him this past 12 years in a slightly less stressful environment.
Ha, I love that, Daniel. Great anecdotes. And, imagine, yeah, Congress, decorum. There weren't senators wearing hoodies and, you know, uh, Congress people weren't waving the flags of a foreign government, trying to do business. Imagine that.
Yeah, absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
so from Ron Paul's revolution that, kind of kicked off with his two presidential campaigns in the 2000s to kind of today's populist moment. Is this what you expected? Obviously, you were hoping for Ron Paul to make a run at the White House and win the nomination for the Republican Party. But did he pave the way for outsiders like Trump, as president? Did he pave the way for Vivek Ramaswamy, who seems kind of poised to win the Ohio governorship next year? Did he pave that way for them to exceed electorally?
I think that to a degree he did because he allowed things to be discussed that couldn't have been discussed or that wouldn't have been discussed before. And he's one of the most important ones to do that. But I would also just mention people like Pat Buchanan, who influenced me greatly in the 1990s, starting in 1992. He also paved the way for a new kind of populism. Now, there are a lot of things I disagreed with and do disagree with Pat Buchanan, particularly with regard to trade. But nevertheless, his heart is in the right place. His head is in the right place on many, many other issues. But he said things at the time that weren't supposed to be said. And I think that was part of it as well. But here comes Ron Paul. I mean, the Ron Paul deciding to run in '07 was not his choice. I mean, it was not his first choice or his second choice. And I know for a fact, because my dear departed friend, Kent Snyder, who was his first campaign manager, he had come up with it as a great idea. Hey, why don't we do this? And I'm sure Kent was in touch with Lou Rockwell, who loved that kind of thing back in the day. And I'm sure the two of them talked about it a lot. And they thought, well, why not? And I know for a fact that they dragged him kicking and streaming to run. This was not something he wanted. And that's the sort of the irony of life, isn't it? The people who really deserve the office the most are the ones who want it the least, because that's the last thing he wanted. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had won if he had resigned the next day, because the last thing he wanted to do was run the country. But it really wasn't something he wanted. And that's really what we need. But there are a lot of people, but I think he's the most important in terms of at least introducing what we would call libertarian ideas, free market ideas, I prefer to call them, and just the ability to think in alternatives, alternative spheres. So yes, I think he was very much of importance in that respect.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. How bullish are you on capitalism and free markets today? Obviously these things, um, come and go. There's peaks and valleys, but where do you find us in this moment today in regards to small government and freedom?
Well, I'm pretty worried. I have to be honest with you. I see this administration, which I mean, I wanted Trump to win. We were very, very bullish on Trump from the beginning, but some of the indications that I'm seeing are very alarming. You see the government taking significant stakes in private companies. That's a big problem. I mean, imagine if Biden had done that. What a Republican-controlled House and Senate would have done. They rightly would have gone nuts. Um, Imagine, President Trump um, basically strong arming a company like TikTok to sell to new owners who are much more amenable to his philosophical and political views just because of that. We could, I guess, talk about that attack on the First Amendment, but you see, not only did they take stakes in some of these companies, but they're looking at other companies to take stakes in. So I think that right now it's under threat, and that's why we need more free market advocates out there saying this isn't right. And the problem, I mean, for us really, is that the sort of the well of people who have concerns with Trump has been so poisoned by these crazed, psychotic people who have Trump derangement syndrome, that if you simply criticize him, a lot of his supporters will put you in that camp. Oh, you just hate him. You probably loved Obama. Okay, go back and look at the articles I wrote during Obama. I mean, and it's a problem. It's hard to criticize him without people being, very upset. And we noticed this on the Liberty Report as well. I mean, whenever we criticize him, our numbers are bad, and people, they just don't want to hear it, unfortunately. So yes, I'm very concerned that no one is making a case right now for real free markets. Certainly no one in the House and Senate except for Thomas Massie, and in the Senate for Senator Rand Paul. Other than that, there are very few who actually understand the fundamentals of the free market, of Austrian economics.
Yeah, it is concerning, Daniel. I hope it's, kind of maybe just a time we're in where there is this cult of personality built around Trump, and that hopefully free market types can gain hold again. So you touched on something that I think that's really important, is that both parties kind of adopt each other's ideas when they're in power, and take the statist approach, whether it's economically, like you said, with the U.S. government taking a stake in Intel and other companies, and also with free speech. Recently, we've heard we've seen the Republicans who campaigned on being the free speech party this time around, are curbing free speech. How does that worry you?
Yeah, I mean, somehow it's not free speech to criticize the policies of a foreign country, of Israel. I mean, free speech, except if you go on a college campus and say, well, you know what, I don't think it's that great of an idea to kill a bunch of civilians, or at least we shouldn't be paying for it. Oh, you're deported, or your college is defunded, and all that. It's really the problem. And I mean, it's interesting how a certain crowd has hijacked the term woke right, and completely reversed its meaning. But the reality of the woke right is these are the people who are behaving just as the woke left behaved. If you said something that was they consider racist, they had to destroy you. You had to be doxxed and fired from your job. And we saw that just recently with the murder of Charlie Kirk. When people, now I don't agree with people who said nasty things about him, but nevertheless, they should have had the right to do it without having their lives destroyed because of people. I mean, free speech means you can be. Now, people say, well, yeah, but it's not without consequences. That's true. But really, if someone says a knuckleheaded thing, You're going to go and you're going to ruin their life because they said, "Oh, Charlie Kirk wasn't all that." Okay, well, you lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your family. I mean, it's very disturbing, and people are angry. Well, we've had it done to us for so long. It's our turn to take it, to do it. Well, what do you think is going to happen next time? Because when they get back in power, and they will, they're going to be even more PO'd, and it's going to get even more extreme. How far are we going to take this? What is the end game? And a lot of people don't understand it, and they get very angry about this thing. But it's, people have to have the freedom to say things without, certainly without the government doing anything. But even without the people who have been victims recently being kicked off Twitter for saying conservative things, what have you, and they're the first ones in line to do it. I mean, I just find that very distasteful.
Hmm, totally. Uh, like our discussion about the free markets, do you think there's actually a path back to a free speech consensus? When I was a kid, my image of leftists was the ACLU and defense of free speech, whether it was someone on the left or Nazis. Like you said, you may disagree with people, but that defense of them having the right to say what's on their mind is so important. What is the path back, Daniel?
I mean, it's disturbing for me personally. I mean, I went to UC Berkeley, which is the home of the free speech movement, 1964, Sproul Plaza. This is where it was born. And I watched with dismay, like around 2020 or what have you, when the riots came in, Antifa was beating the crap out of kids because they were protesting in favor of free speech. It's very, very disturbing to see this. I mean, free speech is a dangerous thing, obviously. If they say things you don't like, there can have consequences. That's again why they had to take down TikTok because of that. I mean, I think it's just like going to the gym. I mean, I think bringing back free speech means we have to continue to exercise it and to advocate for it. I don't know that that's the solution, but I don't know what else we can do than to advocate for it and continue to advocate for it. And Dr. Paul always views the First Amendment as the absolute number one most important amendment because without that, none of the other ones make sense anyway.
The founders were definitely right to put it first in the Bill of Rights.
Absolutely.
I'd like to pivot, Daniel, to talk about DOGE for a little bit. So, the Department of Government Efficiency, this was kind of spearheaded by Elon Musk, by Vivek Ramaswamy, at least initially, and he didn't end up staying on for whether or not it was his electoral plans or a rift within between him and the Trump administration. What do you think DOGE was ever going to lead to real reform? Was it theater or something else?
I think relatively early on, it started becoming obvious that it was theater, and I certainly don't blame Elon for it, and I definitely don't blame. I mean, this is one of the most exciting things I would say in my political life, my life of observing politics, is seeing a bunch of young people. Everyone was laughing, "Oh, this guy's 19." Seeing a bunch of young people running through government, realizing and exposing the fact that we don't need any of these people. We don't need all these thousands of people in the Department of Education doing absolutely nothing. That was amazing and fantastic. But where I think I started, sobering up, so to speak, is then when we saw the recoil on the part of the U.S. Congress. That's the last thing they wanted to see. Is the exposure of the fact that we really don't need Washington that much. We don't need the executive branch that much, and that could spread. And so when that started, and I think Senator Paul was really good on this, and he wanted to codify these changes, as quickly as possible because he knew, and Nasty was the same, they knew that the momentum would slow at some point because Washington would realize, we're taking a lot of body blows here. It's starting to hurt. It's going to be hard to fight back if they keep hitting us in the kidneys. And that was starting already. And when Congress refused to codify these changes, when it refused to act upon them, that's when I knew, sadly enough, that probably one of the most exciting political moments of my life was going to come to pretty much nothing. But what do we take from it? What did we take from the ruins? Well, it was popular. People liked it. It was successful and could have been much more successful. So maybe that's a blueprint for a future president to do something, especially if we can maybe get a couple better people in Congress. I mean, it'd be nice to have better than just two people, one in the House and one in the Senate. There's a couple of other good ones. I mean, on certain issues.
Yeah, it was a sight to behold, especially, as someone who's, terminally online, maybe on X a little too much. There was such an excitement behind Doge, people in the millennial and Gen Z age cohort, I think, were just like super into this thing, and I hope you're right that someone can capture the spirit of Doge in a future campaign and ride that to success. But yeah, getting past Congress is going to be really tough. Every president promises to cut spending. Even the Democrats, claim they'll cut down on waste. But the pork barrel spending that happens in Congress, it's not politically expedient to vote against spending, I guess. That's something I'm concerned about too, Daniel. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, Ron Paul got away with it, in his district, and it actually became harder because when he started out, um, and certainly even when I came to work for him in 2001, but he had been in office that second time since what, 98, 99, I guess. But he had been in a couple times before. But he had a pretty rural district, and so that's sort of natural, like stay out of our way. A lot of farmers. But as time passed, toward the end of my time and his time in the House, we got like Clear Lake, we got NASA, we got a lot of government employees, and we were sweating. It was bad for a while. I mean, they were nasty. They would call us up. What are you going to do for us? We hate your guts and all this sort of thing. But of course, we were always polite. And lo and behold, we started doing really well in that part of Texas. It's hard to visualize it, but there's a whole area like on the 45 corridor where there's a lot of government employees. There's all kinds of NASA people, and they're not necessarily from Texas. And we really started doing better. The numbers were doing better there, so it does happen, and it can happen that you can encourage people in this way, and I think there is a possibility of doing that. But it wasn't it was very tricky for a while.
Yeah, I think it definitely takes the right candidate, right? And hopefully we can identify more of those moving forward. It's easy for libertarians or, any conservatives, I guess, generally to be optimistic about the mounting debt that we have, not just at the federal level, but at state levels and even the municipal level nationwide. You sound optimistic though, Daniel. So I imagine you don't think the debt spiral is already unstoppable?
Oh, I think it is, isn't it? I mean, what are they gonna do? They have $1 trillion in debt payments every year. That could fund like basically everything else but the military machine. It is, and I think that's why we're seeing and a lot of people have this theory that the Trump administration is trying to inflate us out of this debt crisis, and that means it's putting it squarely on the back of middle and working class Americans, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, um, you know, uh, to get their way out of it rather than stop spending. I don't know if we can get out of the whole thing. I mean, Dr. Paul even says it may actually come to an economic crash, and maybe we can rebuild if we can articulate our principles strongly enough and they can be adopted. We might have a chance, but I don't know that there's a way out of it right now. I don't know what we can do to get out of it right now. I know they may think that a war would be a nice little thing to get us out of it, but they're mistaken again.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad I clarified that. I agree with you. Between Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, and now
Military,
interest. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, all that mandatory spending, what actually is cuttable, right? So that kind of brings me back to the sound money principles. The Fed, it's not just the Treasury. The Fed has a role in kind of overseeing the banking industry, and they can get banks to lever up to their gills and essentially print money. And that's a big problem. The Fed's also kind of the de facto buyer of last resort for Treasury bonds that fund the government. And when they engage in QE, they're essentially freeing up the market to go buy more government paper. So, um, how can Americans who are getting crushed more and more by inflation ever hope to see reform with the Fed? Is it a crisis, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I do think it is, and I think that's why a lot of people are interested in crypto, and I know there's a lot of different views about it, and Dr. Paul has his own views, and they're subtle views because it's a complicated situation, but I mean, I do think there is some promise for the future in crypto. I mean, I think and I am not an expert by far. I'm not an expert, only from like, flyover territory. But I mean, we have some friends that are very involved in it as well, and we had a great conversation with a terrific guy a couple of months ago. Spent about an hour. It was great because Dr. Paul somewhat skeptical on certain aspects of it, and for them, they were going back and forth, and it was really very educational. Um, but this individual, I won't say his name, but he makes a great point to the extent that we are able to avoid getting into bed with government on this space, then that could be an area where we could regain and reclaim some of our personal economic and personal freedom in the future. So I do think that's probably where there's the most hope right now. If if people can get avoid the temptation of intertwining themselves too much with government.
Well said, Daniel. As you know, my audience is a Bitcoin audience, and Ron Paul being a gold standard advocate historically, to me, Bitcoin is the digital transformation of gold for a networked society and a networked world. It's got scarcity, it's more portable than gold. I'm not trashing on gold. It has its place. A lot of us refer to gold as analog Bitcoin now, instead of how Bitcoin's called digital gold. We call gold analog Bitcoin. But you can settle transactions with finality. It's a bearer asset in the same way gold is, but you can do it in minutes globally. It's easy, it's cheap to verify. I'd say cheaper than trying to find tungsten, in the center of a gold bar. But they've got that immutable ledger or blockchain. So that's kind of my perspective. But I'm not here to convince everyone about that. Like I said, my audience is already way down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But whether or not it's Bitcoin, whether or not it's returning to the gold standard, I guess, how does sound money save us, not only fiscally but maybe culturally from the ills of government?
That's a great question, especially the second part, because one of the interesting things that Dr. Paul does is he does turn it into a moral issue, and it's the idea that you have currency that's backed by nothing. It strikes him not only as is fiscally unsound, but as deeply immoral, because it allows you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, or be able to do. I mean, Dr. Paul's the kind of guy who, like, it's. I mean, here's another anecdote, but he actually personally finds it shameful if you buy a car, for example, and don't just pay for the car, and drive off the lot. And I had to buy a car a few years ago, and he was surprised that I didn't just buy the car. I didn't have the money to just buy the car. So he thinks that debt itself is shameful, and there's no debt like the debt of living on fake currency. And that's why, like you say, there is a sort of rift between gold and crypto and Bitcoin. And I understand that I'm sort of an observer, and I see the correctness on both sides. But I have obviously we have a lot of Bitcoin supporters at the Ron Paul Institute, and they've helped us out a lot, and we really appreciate it. So that's really opened my eyes to what it's able to do for people, and it's very encouraging, I think. So I think whatever path, as long as you realize the immorality of of this fake money that we have right now, I think you're on the right track.
you know that gives me a thought. Can hard money actually constrain the government? It certainly has in the past, but is there a tendency to larger and larger government, or do you think it's changing the hearts and minds that really is going to change the trajectory of this nation to return to a more fair governmental system that protects people's rights?
I mean, I would like to think that we can win the hearts and minds. That Dr. Paul always says, the message is perfect, but the messenger, as in he's talking about himself, is imperfect, and so he always is disappointed in himself that he's not able to deliver the message as convincingly as he would like to. And I think a lot of us share that sentiment. I wish we could convince people of these things. And we do try. We try. I mean, I think a big success would be to convince um, the working classes, the middle classes in the U.S., the flag wavers, that they're being ripped off and they're being sold a bill of goods when they rah all these military adventures overseas because it's stealing, literally the food out of their children's mouths. Um, but it may actually have to take, as you say, this breakdown, this complete financial collapse, to give the opportunity to be reborn in a more fiscally sane manner. It's like you want to do it the easy way or the hard way. It'd be nice to do it the easy way, but we're going to have to do it either way.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think the podcasting arena has really unlocked some of that, Daniel. And we're able to reach people. I think with this message of liberty and what you guys are doing with the Liberty Report, was has been colossal. And I think, just carry on. I almost wish Dr. Paul's campaigns were, I wish you were 10 years younger, because to be able to see how podcasting has taken off today, can you imagine if in 2016 Ron Paul had run for president, if 2020 Ron Paul had run for president, how many even more people he would have been able to wake up. I think that's a great place to leave it. Tell our viewers where they can find you online and follow along with your shows.
Sure. Well, we do the Ron Paul Liberty Report Monday through Friday. And on Friday is more of an economics and financially focused show. That's with Chris Rossini, my colleague. But Monday through Thursday, I do the show with Dr. Paul live at noon Eastern time on Rumble at the moment. We also, the show itself is a product of the Ron Paul Institute, which we started in 2013 when Dr. Paul left office. We're at ronpaulinstitute.org. One of the things that we believe very strongly in is having people get together in an analog way. In fact, crypto people in an analog way. But that's why we hold conferences. We do 2 or 3 conferences a year. We do a big one in DC every year as well. And that's for people to meet each other and just by meeting and talking, you hear great speakers, you hear a lot of great ideas, but meeting people who are on the same page as you are, who you had no idea, and here they are sitting across from you, they may actually be involved in a business that you also are involved in. So you can find business partners, even romantic partners, who knows, it's not my business. But that's what we do. And that's what we continue to do. And we educate young people through the Ron Paul Scholars Seminar. So we do a lot of great things at the Ron Paul Institute, and we love to have participation, support, what have you from your listeners. It'd be fantastic.
Awesome. And one thing we have all of our guests say before they leave, Daniel, is stay orange.
Okay. Stay orange.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man who makes sure Ron Paul is right about everything, Daniel McAdams.
Thank you.